We have one more storyteller for you tonight before we get around to the mystery guest, which could be any of you, or anyone who put their name in the cup. And that last storyteller for the evening is Mr. Jim O'Grady, who is an amazing Moth Grand Slam winner, and you're up at the New York Times. Do you still, or is that's past? That's yes.
When I deign to grace their pages.
Right. He just kind of calls them up and he says, you know, I got a thing I want to talk about. And they're like, please, Mr. O'Grady, please. So, but for us, he just comes right down. So here he is, Jim O'Grady.
So, I just said so. Here's a tip about what not to do when appearing live on WNYC Radio as a guest of the Leonard Lopate show. Do you know this show?
Yeah.
Okay. I know this show because I listen to it every day at lunch during the 2 years it took for me to write the book that got me on it. Because I lived at the time in the ground floor of a house on Staten Island. And I remember one day I was in the kitchen at lunch eating a grilled cheese sandwich. And I'm looking out the window at my neighbors, the Frisolas, a couple in their 80s, and they're hanging sheets on the line. But then I look again closer, and I see they're not sheets, they're giant pairs of underwear. And then Mrs. Frisola does the thing she always does to motivate Mr. Frisola to work faster. She takes a rolled-up magazine and swats him on the ass. And this is my life. And while I'm looking at this, I'm listening to Leonard Lopate on the radio interview Margaret Atwood about her latest literary bestseller. And he says, Margaret Atwood will be reading tonight at the Union Square Barnes & Noble. And I think to myself, one day that will be me. An author with a reading, not an old man whose wife beats him with a magazine. And so I write a little more, and then I go to my night job as a social worker for the homeless in a former men's room at the Staten Island Ferry, where you can see concrete patches in the wall where the urinal pipes used to come out. And every night around 2 a.m. I sit there by myself, and I just, in my tiled office, dreaming about this appearance of mine on the Leonard Lopate show, where Leonard and I will be trading bon mot, which is French, which I do not speak. But somehow it's just really good radio. And afterward he says to me, I thought Margaret Atwood was my favorite guest, but you and I have got to hang out. And I actually shared this dream with my wife at the time, and she said, you have got to calm down. She knew the signs of when I was starting to care too much about something, because she saw the signs every day, pretty much. So here's what you don't do when you're a guest live on the radio, on the Leonard Lopate show. Don't lose your temper. Don't yell at Murray, your 65-year-old co-author. And don't tell the host in so many words to shut it. So the book comes out. It's a biography of the Berrigan brothers, these two Catholic priests who they burned draft files during Vietnam, and they threw blood on nuclear weapons. You know, not your normal, ordinary priests. And Murray and I go on a summer-long book tour in the summer. Not the winter. And throughout it, I defer to Murray because he's older than me, and he's louder than me, and because he has no conscience. Like, there's this one-liner he always uses about the Berrigan brothers' father, Tom, who's quite important to the story. He says, Tom Berrigan was a cross between a bishop and a Bolshevik. And he uses this line on TV and in front of live audiences, and he says it, and then he chuckles. like he's on Conan and he's gotten off a zinger. Except it's totally wrong. And the first time he says it, I pull him aside with a publicist. I say, Murray, Tom Berrigan was not a Bolshevik. He was an anti-communist, and he was not a bishop. He was a farmer. And Murray looks at me like, and your point is what? So I turn to the publicist, and she looks at me like, hey, you know, I make $28,000 a year. You think I give a shit what this guy says? And so finally, I said to Murray, okay, look, just don't say it on the Leonard Lopez show, okay? It's our last appearance on this tour. So just, okay? All right? And he says, oh, don't worry. But I know him. And he's my friend to this day, but he's a stubborn prick. He's the kind of guy who will read an op-ed in the New York Times, and I would see this, and if he disagreed with it, he wouldn't just shake his head. He would take out a magic marker and write Nazi fuck on the newspaper. So we're in the studio on the Leonard Lopez show, and Leonard opens by saying, you know, the Berrigan brothers' father, Tom, is important to the story. And before he can ask a question, Murray says, Tom Berrigan was a cross between a bishop and a Bolshevik. And I say, Murray, God damn it! And then Leonard starts to say something, and I go, I cut him off, and I launched into a lecture on the history of religion and politics in 20th century America that culminates with an exegesis on liberation theology. I do not say liberation theology because that would be correct. I'm so overexcited, I say theology. And when I'm done, Leonard turns to direct the next question to Murray. And he doesn't just turn his head, he turns his entire body away from me. Because my part of the interview is over. And I butt in a couple more times, but before I know it, it's done. An assistant rushes in, ushers us out, hands us each a cassette tape of our segment so we can cherish it forever. And walks us to the elevator to make sure we leave the building. And when we get outside, I call Murray a moron, and he calls me a fucker, and we walk away from each other. And later, I asked my wife, who has gathered many of her coworkers in her office to listen to me on the Leonard Lopez show, live. And I said, so, how was it? And she says, well, it was good radio.
Jim O'Grady, everyone. I wish I would have heard that live. That would have made me so happy. Can you still find that in like Leonard Lopez archive?
No.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
That's lost.
He's fucking lying. It's on the archive. Go to WNYC.com. I'm sure you can track it down. What was the name of the book?
Disarmed and Dangerous.
Disarmed and Dangerous. I'm sure if you like go to the Leonard Lopez, WNYC.com, just put in the search, you know, Disarmed and Dangerous. I'm sure Jim's crowning moment of radio glory will come shining